special education, giftedness in a sort of program. Pregnancy, all these have different sorts of consequences, and some of them have pretty high stakes. So how do you evaluate these sorts of tests, right? Whether does our driving test really measure driving skills? Or how accurate is a pregnancy test? Now, I would want it to be pretty accurate, right? So just because we have all these tests and they have these big consequences, we want to be able to make sure that they're reliable and valid, right? Everybody, all your loved ones and yourself are going to be exposed to these tests that can change their lives in a lot of different ways. For those of you going off to graduate school, the GRE can be very important. Sometimes there's even like cutoff scores about whether you can get in or not. What are some of the problems with the GRE? Because there definitely are some problems. We'll be talking about that during this course. All right. So what is a psychology test then? It's a measurement device or technique used to quantify behavior or aid in the understanding and prediction of behavior. For example.
Are you going to send us a PowerPoint?
Yes, I'm going to be placing them this afternoon. I'm sorry, I just haven't had the internet. But for the future, I will always have the slides before class. Right. So thank you. For example, maybe I want to come up with a measure of sleep hygiene, for example. And I want to predict whether or not a person is going to have problems with sleep. So I could put items on there like, how many caffeinated beverages do you drink today? Like, do you have caffeinated beverages after 4 p.m.? Do you use your bed for anything other than sleeping and sex? Like, you know, I can come up with a list of questions, and if my measure is, valid, I should be able to predict whether somebody's going to have a problem sleeping or not based on their responses to that. Okay. All right. So anybody can make up a test. Yeah. Teachers, faculty. Where is it? Well, somewhere on there, it's like midterms and finals. We're making up tests. You guys can sit here and, like I said, come up with a sleep measure, or you can come up with, a measure for extroversion. Like, we could just sit here and write up items right now and come up with a test. But that doesn't mean that it is reliable and valid, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's do an example here of a driver's test. What do we want to measure with a driver's test? What do we want to measure? How good of a driver?
Your responses to your environment, how you use your things while driving, your multitasking.
Safety. So we're going to write, so it said, measure if you're a good driver. So what items would we have? Somebody said safety. Is that right? How will we measure if somebody is a safe driver? Seatbelt. So do they put their seatbelt on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Put on seatbelt. What else? Not using their cell phones.
If they obey the signs, if the stop sign, they go.
Obey the sign. Speed limit. What else?
Do they not bang into things?
What?
Do they not bang into things?
Not banging into things. That's probably good. What else? Mirrors. Environment. Both hands on wheel. This is a good list. So when we look at the driver's test that they have now, we have that written component, making sure that you know the rules and regulations on the road, what to do with a cyclist, what do you do with like a double yellow line, all these sorts of things, so they know what to do. And there's also a driver's test where they actually get into the car, so making sure they do these things for safety. Is there anything that you remember taking a driver's test that you didn't think really measured whether or not somebody's a good driver or not? Hands on the wheel.
Yeah.
Both hands, what is it, 2 o'clock?
Yes.
Both hands, so you'd be like, maybe that's not necessary for good driving. Anything else?
They want you to go the exact speed limit.
Exact speed. No.
At all over.
Not at all over. Better to go a little bit under for that test. What else? Right. Right. Parallel parking. What else do they do? One requirement they have is that you bring in a good car. It has to meet their safety conditions. Do you think that that's fair? What if they just want a driver's license, but they don't have a car? Do they just borrow somebody else's car? That's what you did?
Probably not, but you have to have insurance.
Right.
Right.
It's all pretty standard.
But yeah, that's without a car.
Okay. So it seems like they're doing a pretty good job about measuring whether you're a good driver or not. But what about the cutoff score? At what point do you say, yes, good driver, no, bad driver? How do they make that particular cutoff? Right, so say it's out of 100 points and they decide 70. It sounds kind of arbitrary.
Yeah. But they also have automatic fails. Like if you get into a car accident, then you don't
Like if you
Run your
down a curve and they have to do that up like 50 feet,
Right.
automatic fail.
On
If you pass a red light or a stop sign also.
Right. Okay, so people had to come up with, so these were just people, probably experts, sitting down together in a room like us, just probably naming all these things that you're naming, right? So that's probably usually the first part of developing a test. You really clarify what it is that you want to measure. So even when somebody says we want to measure whether a person is good driving or not, we want an operational definition of that. What does that mean exactly? What constitutes like a good driver? What does good mean? What items are we going to have? And then they're probably going to go they develop this test, both the written portion and the in-car portion, and they're going to see how it does. And then maybe they'll come back and they'll modify it a little bit more. Okay. Because there are consequences. So if you do like a bad test, maybe your written questions are really hard using vocabulary from like a graduate student vocabulary or something like that, and it just may make the test too hard for people to pass. But it doesn't really measure whether or not the person's a good driver. It measures reading skills or vocab level, right? So they even have to test that portion to make sure that they're not measuring intelligence, but they're measuring they're a good driver, right? Okay, let's do one, because this probably applies to everybody. So say you have a test for a class. Everybody in here has taken Intro to Psychology? Okay, so say you want to make a test for the class. What would you say that you want to measure for a test for Intro to Psychology? What would you want to measure out of that test? Understanding of basic concepts. Theories? Mm-hmm. What else? Yeah, we make sure you have a good competence. So a lot of people, when I was teaching Intro to Psych, they would first, take, it's mostly like knowledge. They're used to memorizing definitions to things. So what you guys are, the understanding of the concepts means like a step beyond that, being able to apply these concepts to real-world situations, novel situations, maybe examples that we didn't talk about in class, but you're able to identify them on your own. So that's one thing that we would like to do. Have you taken any sorts of tests for classes that you didn't really think measured your knowledge of the material or that class? Yeah, how didn't it measure that?
They asked something completely different. Different examples of what they gave us.
Right, so something completely different. It wasn't talked about in class, not in the book. It's just completely new. What else?
I've had professors who will lecture for hours in front of the students, and in the test there's nothing that they lectured on.
Right, so we're going to talk about those principles too. So as far as the contents of a test, even though it's supposed to cover both lecture and the book, it's always just the book, right? What else? Think of anything else?
Or you read a whole chapter or 3 chapters and everyone on like one paragraph. That's all the answers is just one paragraph.
One paragraph. Right.
Just one to
From
that.
a table. From a table. Some little itty bitty detail. So you have 3 chapters.
Your brain's like totally somewhere else. Is this going to be on there? Is this going to be on there?
Right.
And then you get the test and it's like just
the one part you get to read.
You got overwhelmed with all this information, all different thoughts, and then it's like, okay, you failed the test.
Right.
Because it's like you didn't concentrate, you didn't focus on that one paragraph.
Yeah, no, this is a really good point. You say this through the test in 3 chapters, and I've had this happen too, where like maybe in 2 chapters they have like one question from this little table, but everything else is focused on this other chapter. So it should be evenly distributed, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of test construction that we're going to talk about too, how to make a test that is better than that. I took a graduate level assessment course, and we have things, these, retest reliability, would say 0.76 for digit span on the subtest and intelligence test. Like we had to memorize like the exact numbers for these sorts of things, and there's hundreds of numbers. Like, well, how is this important? You know what I mean? You would look them up. That's why there's tables for them, right? But it's interesting how people focus on these little details that don't seem to matter versus the meat of it, right?
Yeah. If you have a nice professor, though, they're going to say, like, okay, this table, like, memorize this table.
Right.
And, like, don't be as concerned about everything else in the chapter.
Right. They're going to kind of lead you to the important areas, where to focus your attention, because you're absolutely right. You're, studying for hours and it's the wrong stuff, right? And it's important that you construct a test well, too, because there are consequences of it. GPA matters, right?
Yeah.
Where you're going to go next matters. And some of it is in your control about studying and these sorts of things, but some of it is in your professor's control of how they design the tests, right?
And then it had like one answer like on the PowerPoint, and then in the book it was like the opposite answer. So it's like, which one do you get? Do you get his answer, or do you get the book's answer?
Right. Right.
So I never got to find out the answer because honestly, like, they don't give you the answer after the quiz. Some professors do. They give you the answer because they take online classes, so they give you the answers after the quiz, but some don't. They just
You never know.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Like,
You don't want to tell the professor you're wrong because of what they did. So it's like.
Okay, I'm not one of those professors. Even though we may not be going over the tests in class because there's limited test time, if you want to just compare your Scantron to the test, and you have questions, and you're like, no, the book says this right here, you're welcome to come to my office and argue. And if I say, that's a great argument, I'll give it to you, right? Okay, so yeah, the whole class is based on questioning tests and things like that, so question mine. Go right ahead. All right, so no class on Monday. All right, see you guys.